You.
Thanks.
You know the number to call, 0345 6060 973. She's responsible for basically anything that goes on in the Houses of Parliament, sort of, aren't you?
Well, yes, sort of.
Including all the Brexit legislation that's going through. There's been this announcement today on measures to combat sexual harassment. You may want to phone in on that, 0345 6060 973. You can also watch us on Facebook Live or via the LBC website. Well, let's start off on what you've announced today, because you did. I think there was an announcement at just before the summer recess saying that you would announce some measures to come in by the end of January. Well, it's only a week late, which in politics I guess is quite good. Why are these measures needed? Because some people say it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to what happened with the various scandals at the end of last year.
Well, I think it's actually a big day for Parliament. It was quite clear from the allegations about sexual harassment and intimidation that something fundamental needed to be done. And so I hope I can be forgiven for being a bit delighted today, because we have worked cross-party, cross both houses, with a huge number of different parliamentary roles, so members of staff, press lobby and so on, to ensure that everybody across the whole parliamentary estate will in future be able to be part of a behaviour code and able to make confidential complaints should they feel they're not being treated properly.
Is part of the problem the fact that there are 650 different employers in the House of Commons? I mean, there's no actual HR department. Every MP is their own HR department. Isn't that what really needs to be gripped?
Well, that is certainly part of it. I mean, there's more than 15,000 people who work across the parliamentary estate, so it's by no means just MPs and their staff. But you're right, each MP employs their own staff directly. So one of the things that we're putting in place is proper HR guidance for members' staff, so that they can find out whether how they are feeling that they're being treated is in fact contractually right or not. So there's going to be a lot of new measures, including a whole new set of training that's available for people who are employing or managing people in Parliament. And I think it's going to be a real game changer.
But are MPs going to be mandated to go on these consent training courses, or is it their choice? Because the very people that possibly would need to probably won't, will they, if it isn't mandatory?
So there's an element of carrot and stick. So there will be a much broader range of training available. We're also going to create a sort of good employer standard. So MPs whose team, all those who manage staff, have undergone that sort of training will be able to have a special tick against their name. And equally, really importantly, where there are complaints upheld, some of the sanctions for sort of lower level offences will be mandatory training, apologies, behavioural agreements and so on.
What about the higher level offences? Because, shouldn't MPs who are found to have bullied or abused staff just be slung out of their job? Why should someone who's been involved in that kind of activity even be allowed to continue as an MP?
Well, it's important with all of these things, as is the case in the workplace, to focus on culture change and changing behaviour. But certainly where there is serious wrongdoing, then an upholding against a Member of Parliament would be passed to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, who would herself then be able to refer it to the Committee on Standards, who can recommend suspension that invokes the Recall of MPs Act of 2015. And through that way, that can spark a by-election, which can lead to the sacking of a Member of Parliament. But, like in the normal workplace, you do want to have a balance between changing behaviour and improving education and so on, but having proper sanctions for real wrongdoing, and that's what we're looking for.
Your report has revealed that 1 in 5 people working in Westminster have experienced sexual harassment in the last 12 months. Have you ever experienced it?
Well, I, in common with many women in this country, would have to answer truthfully yes, but I don't really want to go into my own experiences here. But suffice to say, having had my own experiences and, of course, as Leader of the Commons, talk to people who've come to me to talk about their own experiences, I do understand the need for a safe place for people to be able to come forward and complain. And certainly some of the examples I've heard are where the people who are doing the complaining, because their name gets out into the press. They find they've got people parked outside their house looking for a story. They find they're trolled on social media for daring to complain, and they become even more victimised. So actually having a confidential complaints procedure that means you can go, you can make your allegation, you can have a proper investigation, and then you can get proper justice at the end of it is really important.
But you've had an experience since you've been an MP.
Well,
I mean, I'm only asking you this because I do think that people in your position, if they say, yeah, this has happened to me, and without going into maybe gory details, it actually gives other people, other women in that situation, a licence to come forward and complain.
Yeah, and, I mean, as I say, before I was in Parliament, I was 25 years in finance, and throughout that period of time I've experienced both bullying and sexual harassment, and in line with many women and men. So I don't think that there's anything deeply unusual about that. But of course, we all are informed by our own experiences, and that helps us to form a judgment about what we can do to put it right.
And you worked in the City of London for a long time. I mean, there are parallels to be drawn here. Do you wish somebody in the city had done what you've been doing today many years ago?
I think actually many workplaces are ahead of Parliament in terms of having proper grievance procedures and so on. And one of the problems that we do have in Parliament, as I say, there's more than 15,000 people who work there, and they have diverse employers. We've got contractors working on parts of the buildings, we've got staff employed by political parties, staff employed by MPs, staff employed by peers, we have the House staff themselves. So there are lots of different employment contracts and rules, and so it's quite difficult to achieve a common complaints procedure across all of those. But I think today we've achieved that.
Well, remember, you can watch us on Facebook Live and on the LBC website. The number to call, 0345 6060 973. Lots of calls on Brexit, you won't be surprised to hear. Chris is in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Ian. Mrs. Leadsom, actually, I want to ask a different question. You talking about abuse. This week, Andrew Pearce, in the Woking Daily Mail, and the word was used around Anna Soubry. And if you're committed to anything, will you write this?
Chris, we're going to have to get you back on a better line, I'm afraid, because I couldn't really understand what you were saying there, apart from the words Andrew Pearce. We'll get you back on a different line. Dean's in Oxford. Hello, Dean.
Hello, Ian. Nice to speak to you. Hello, Andrea.
Hi.
My question to Andrew is this. During the leadership campaign for the Conservative Party, you stated that you were against gay marriage and civil partnerships were okay. Is that still your position?
Well, actually, my position on it was that I positively abstained, and very specifically, my view is that same-sex love is exactly as valuable in the eyes of the world, and definitely in my Christian view in the eyes of God, as that of heterosexual marriage. But I felt that the legislation was wrong, so I voted both for and against it.
Why did you think it was wrong?
Well, it's quite complicated, but essentially what I felt is that civil partnerships, which are currently available only to same-sex couples and not to opposite-sex couples, and marriage, which can be either in a registry office as a civil ceremony or in a church as a religious ceremony, are all just now confused. And I wanted to see a proper sorting out of the legislation.
I mean, there has been a suggestion, I think, coming from number 10, that maybe there ought to be now civil partnerships for straight people. Is that something that you would support?
It is a private member's bill that's being brought forward by one of my colleagues, and certainly, yes, I would certainly welcome seeing that.
In retrospect, though, I mean, some people thought that the world would end with gay marriage. It hasn't. Knowing what you know now, would you support it now? I
do support it. I've always been absolutely clear. I think that the commitment and love of same-sex couples is every bit as worthy as that of heterosexual couples. So, let's put that beyond all doubt.
You mentioned your Christian faith. How important is that to the way that you make decisions as a politician?
Well, I have certain values about, being honest, acting with integrity, trying to do the right thing for the country and for the people around me, and that does underpin my views about politics.
Let's go to Ben, who's in Cardiff. Hello, Ben.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah, I'm phoning about
this sort of hard Brexit narrative that sort of resurfaced, this will of Theresa May being hijacked by the hard Brexiteers to take us out of to take us out of the single market and the customs union, when to me, it's just really not clear that is the mandate from the people. There's just no way of knowing why Leave voters voted Leave.
Well, you're the hardest of hardest Brexiteers, aren't you, Andrea?
Well, actually,
I say that as a compliment.
Well, thank you very much, Ian. I think. I mean, in truth, I've always been quite clear. There's no such thing as a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit.
Well, there is. If you leave the single market, that's a hard Brexit. If you stay in the single market, that's a soft Brexit. What about using those two as the thread for this conversation?
Well, in reality, if you stay in the single market, you're not leaving the European Union. So
yes, you are, because Norway's in the single, not in the European Union.
Well, what the Prime Minister has made absolutely clear is that the will of the people that we leave the EU means that we will leave the single market, the customs union, will take back control.
Will of the people? What right do you have to say that's the will of the people? You don't know why the Leave voters voted to leave.
Well, it was on the grounds of the result of the referendum, which was overwhelmingly for leaving the EU. And
if you the EU, that was all that was on the ballot paper.
Yeah, and what that means is leaving the single market, leaving the customs union.
That wasn't in the referendum. I mean, if you think about it, if 4 out of every 100 Leave voters wanted to stay in the single market, assuming that all 16.8 million who voted Remain wanted to stay in the single market, then you have the mandate from the people to stay in the single market. But there's just no way of knowing, how every Leave voter, why they voted Leave.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a very good point, but nevertheless, the Prime Minister is quite clear about what we'll be doing,
well, she's
and
clear,
the fact that
she's clear, but she's got no right to be that clear. She hasn't got the mandate from the people to leave the single market. She's got the mandate to leave the EU, but not the single market.
Well, hasn't she got the mandate through the general election result, where the Conservatives did actually get more votes and more seats than any other party?
Well, that's a contributing factor, but she didn't get a majority, and she hasn't got the governing position she is as a result of the DUP alliance is not a mandate to deliver on a hard Brexit.
It's a fair point, isn't it, Andrea?
Well, I understand your perspective on it, but, the reality is that the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. It was absolutely clear during the run-up to the referendum on what was meant by that. People like David Cameron and Nick Clegg and George Osborne made very clear that leaving the EU meant leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, and that was very clear at the time. But you did have people like
Dan Hannan saying that they didn't mean that we'd have to leave the single market. It wasn't. I've seen those quotes as well as you have, but there are plenty of quotes from the other side saying, well, no, our single market membership wouldn't be threatened.
Well, I think what the Prime Minister is seeking to do is the closest possible tariff-free, non-tariff, barrier-free relationship with the European Union, but we are very clear that we are leaving the EU, and what that does mean is we're leaving the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, we'll be taking back control of our borders, we will be taking back control of our money, leaving the single market and leaving the customs union.
But not in 2019, will we? Because we're going to be in the customs union. Are you happy that we're going to be in the customs union during the transition period?
So we will be leaving the EU in March 2019. The idea of an implementation period, no, we will absolutely have left the European Union. That is quite clear. The idea of the implementation period is simply to enable, in fact, as your caller is looking for, is that soft exit that enables businesses not to have a sudden change, a sudden, ceasing of their business, but to enable that smooth exit from all of the existing EU systems and to the new UK arrangements that we're putting in place.
When you see these impact assessments that have been leaking over the past few days, where we see that the North East economy is going to be 16% smaller in 15 years' time than it would have been if we'd stayed in the single market and the customs union, West Midlands 13%, I think Northern Ireland 12%, how certain are you that you're right?
Well, I am very confident, and I think also, as
but what
has
if
been
you're
said,
not? What if you're not right?
Well, let's be clear. We had a referendum to settle this subject, and we took a decision to leave the European Union, and there can be no backtracking on that. And
even if all of the evidence shows, And I accept all the caveats, well, how can you forecast 15 years in advance and all that sort of thing. But even if all the evidence shows that it would be an economic disaster for this country, you would still say, no, we have to plough ahead because we've got that vote.
Well, you're really making my point for me, Ian, because you're saying all the evidence shows. Well, the evidence doesn't show. The forecast, which is a function of the inputs to the forecasting model, suggests something. It was very initial preliminary forecasting, and as we know, forecasts looking into the future 15 years hence are speculative by definition.
Well, they are, but can you
also,
cite me any forecast that shows a positive vision for the economy?
Well, I can. I don't want to get into trading economic forecasts, but you'll be aware that that the economists for Britain group have shown a forecast that shows that the UK stands to gain significantly from free trade agreements around the world.
But you
so
believe
there
those
certainly are
forecasts,
forecasts,
but not the official government ones, which you are a government minister. Surely you have to believe those.
I am making very clear to you that economic forecasts, particularly when they're 15 years out, cannot by definition be accurate.
So what's the point of them? Why are they even made? Why are the civil servants spending time and taxpayers' money making these forecasts if you aren't going to believe them?
Well, it's not a matter of whether I believe them or not. It's a matter of taking them into account and taking the very genuine, useful advice of civil servants, which government does all the time, taking it into account and then making decisions based on the best of advice that is available. So I think the key thing that is an error is to treat these as if they are sort of cast in stone scientific evidence. That's where the misunderstanding lies.
Ben, thank you for your call. Let's go to Brendan in Portsmouth. Hello, Brendan.
Hello, Ian. Good afternoon. Hello, Andrea.
Hi.
Yes, hi. I think the last caller must have missed the Prime Minister of the day, David Cameron, actually saying that leaving the European Union meant leaving the single market and the custom union. I don't know what more of an authority that you would need than the Prime Minister actually saying that, but by the by. I was just interested in the dynamics of the Conservative Party at the moment, Andrea. I know that you campaign quite hard for Leave. I followed your campaign. I think we want a similar style of Brexit, by the way. But obviously you've got like Redwood Mogg on one wing of the party, and you've got Soubry Clark on the other. You seem to be one of the only sort of like Brexiteers from around the referendum that's just got their head down since. You're not even talking about Brexit that much. This is probably the first time I've seen you talk in the media about Brexit since you know. After
what's your question,
really.
Brendan?
Well, my question really is: how are we going to patch up the differences between the two wings of the Conservative Party once all this is said and done?
Well, you know, I think you make a really good point, you know, that there are some very strongly held views, not just amongst Conservative members of Parliament, but right across the House. And people do feel things very passionately, and they act in what they believe is in the best interest of the country. And it's absolutely right that MPs do that. I think what's really important is what the Prime Minister is doing, is treading a very careful line between delivering on the will of the people as expressed in the referendum and trying to ensure that we are listening very carefully to all views across Parliament. And certainly as Leader of the House of Commons, I do take that very seriously myself. You know, I have the responsibility for getting the legislation through, and when members from across the House raise particular issues with me, I do try to take them into account, whether it's an amendment to a particular piece of Brexit legislation or whatever. So we are constantly trying to accommodate the views across the House.
Let's cut to the chase here. Anna Soubry wants you out of the Conservative Party, doesn't she? She would include you in her list with Jacob Rees-Mogg, John Redwood, whoever. Can you really still be in the same party as Anna Soubry?
I mean, Anna, I have a lot of time for. You know, she is a very feisty individual. She has to answer to her own views that she's expressed, but I certainly value her contribution to the Conservative Party.
But when she came out with that statement on Newsnight on Monday that Jacob Rees-Mogg and one or two others should be slung, well, she said 35 MPs on that wing of the Conservative Party weren't really Conservatives. And she said that you should all be slung out of the party. How? I would imagine at the time you probably threw something at the television.
I think people express their views with strong passions, and it's right that they do that. But nevertheless, the Conservative Party is a very broad church, and I think this discussion about how we leave the EU is really highlighting the strength of views and the differences of views.
Isn't it Anna Soubry that's out of touch? Isn't it she who ought to be considering her position?
No, I think she needs to answer for her accusations and the things that she says, but at the same time, she is very much trying to act with integrity and with what she believes is in the best interests of our country.
How do you feel when Remainers call Brexiteers like you crazy Nazis? Have you had a lot of abuse online because of your Brexit views?
Yes, I certainly have, and I think people who are on the Remain side also suffer from that. And I think what I'd say about that is that we are determined to stamp out this online abuse and verbal abuse also. It's completely unacceptable. People do need to treat those they disagree with some respect, and it is a real problem. The Prime Minister's determined to tackle it.
Well, it's Brexit all the way on the questions. Roger's in Stevenage. Hello, Roger.
Good afternoon to you both.
Hi.
Yes, I completely disagree with you, but I'm going to be decent and nice. And
Thank you.
Not get too emotional. I've got a simple question, but I'd like to present it in two strands, a social aspect as well as the financial one.
Can you be quick, because we've only got a few minutes left, Roger?
I think Brexit was generated by a lot of lack of knowledge about what's actually going on, what the EU is, and everybody I've spoken to who's told me backs that up. There are as many reasons for Brexit, for voting leave as there are people that voted leave. I don't think people knew what they were voting
Roger,
for.
I do need a question.
Yes, to the point. We see report after report after report saying that whatever comes after we leave the EU, it will be worse than what we got now. We hear lots of promises, ifs and maybes about we'll be able to do better. But are there any actual hard facts, not just predictions, but the evidence to support them, so we could say we will definitely get that deal, and the money involved will be at least the same as what we get with the EU?
So it's basically asking, what do we actually know about what will happen after Brexit? Because the Prime Minister seems unable to tell us.
Well, there are some big picture items, such as, the UK is the world's sixth or fifth biggest economy. We have two of the world's top 10 universities, Oxford and Cambridge, numbers 1 and 2. We have the world's most successul capital city on earth. We have the world's biggest financial services centre. That is not. The point is that those things are not due to being a member of the European Union. Those are really important background reasons why the United Kingdom will do extremely well standing on our own 2 feet. We have the Commonwealth, with whom we have specific ties. We speak the world's international business language of English. We have the world's best contract law. We have a huge amount going for us, and we have a government that is committed to developing free trade agreements around the world that will open up. I mean, just look at the Prime Minister's visit to China just last week, signing £9 billion worth of deals for the UK to export to China. There is an enormous market there.
But why is it that the Prime Minister can't actually address the British people and say, right, this is what post-Brexit Britain is going to look like, this is why we're going to leave the single market and the customs union and all the rest of it, and paint a positive vision? Because she hasn't done that really ever since she's been Prime Minister. Boris Johnson has tried to do it a couple of times and has got into trouble for it. Why are none of you actually telling us why Brexit is going to be so fantastic?
I'm just starting to tell you, Ian, and I want to go on to say, we are standing on the cusp of a fourth industrial revolution with absolutely extraordinary innovations in medicine, in artificial intelligence, in robotics, in all of the in technology, in financial services, and the UK is at the forefront of that. We have an enormous opportunity to deal with the 92% of the world's population that is not in the European Union, and the 80-something% of the world's GDP that is not in the European Union. So there are enormous opportunities. Now, nobody can say specifically we have this and that specific arrangement, but what we can say is that the UK is incredibly well placed to benefit from the technological advancements that we are at the forefront of. And we have this very strong underpinning manufacturing base, financial services base, skills base, commitment to new apprenticeships. We've got the highest employment ever, and this country is really at the forefront of being able to superbly advance ourselves outside of the European Union.
Final question on the email from Graham, who says, are you pleased you didn't win the Conservative Party leadership?
Well, as I recall, I withdrew from it, and very clearly, because at the time, the last thing the country needed was a 9-week leadership campaign. And Theresa May had the backing of members of Parliament. It was a very difficult time for the country in the wake of the referendum. And I think Theresa May is doing a superb job. I think she is treading the balance between all of the differing views, very strongly held, and she has my full support.
But in an idle moment around the cabinet meeting, when it's all getting a little bit boring, do you ever look across the table and think, that could have been me sitting there?
I don't waste my time thinking about that. I'm loving
you
being
wouldn't be
Leader
human
of
if
the
you didn't,
Commons.
though, from time to time.
Well, you know, I'm loving the job that I have. It's really integral to the success of the Brexit process. And so being able to play a part in making a success of it is what gets me up in the morning.
Andrea Leadsom, thank you very much for
Thanks.
joining us here on LBC. This is LBC, it's 5:01.
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.